It's nice to see everybody. Thought maybe there wouldn't be anybody at church today because of the roads, but people seem to get here and to have gotten here safely. My name is, I'm introducing myself this morning. I'd like you to meet Sid Smith, for those of you who don't know me. Yes, that's who I am.
No, you're not going to do Jane.
Yeah, this is Jane, but unfortunately, Jane cannot be here this morning. She got sick this weekend. Her partner thinks it might have been food poisoning, but she just didn't feel well enough to come this morning. So I heard about this yesterday, and you've got me, and I'm going to do my shtick. And maybe Jane and I will come back later at another time to do the part that she wanted to do. So the theme, I want to welcome the people who are watching in the streaming service in real time, but also those who go on and look at the sessions later in the week or later next month. I am going to do something on reclaiming darkness. We sing, Christ is the light, but I'd like you to think about Christ is the darkness. And just kind of go with me for a little while thinking about the issues around darkness. I didn't tell you anything about myself. So some of you know me fairly well, but for those who don't know me, I'm retired. I'm a professor emerita in the departments of English and women's and gender studies. So, and my field of expertise, as we call it, is in life writing, how people tell narratives about themselves. And I come at this issue or this activity, this human need, this human desire to tell their story through a literary and feminist theoretical standpoint. Jane, the reason we pair well together is Jane comes through to that same thing, that same field, through her training as a psychologist and in the business school. So we would talk about storying your lives in slightly different terms and with slightly different edges on the questions we ask. And that's why it might be interesting to do it for people, that dialogue at some time in the future. So I am talking about something I don't know anything about today, but as an academic, if we can't talk about books we haven't read and things we don't know anything about, then we're falling down at the job. Okay, I just have to figure out where down is. Okay, so if we think first about the kinds of associations that we tend to have about darkness, especially if we've been raised or come to the Christian faith, you will recognize many of these words. Are these the ones that you would think about around biblical, the way in which biblical interpretation talks about darkness? It's the site of sin. We think about the nefarious activities as always taking place under cover of darkness. We think about this thing called evil, however, and that's a whole other discussion we could have. How do we define evil? But let's assume we agree on how we understand evil for our conversation today. It's often the symbol of evil, the darkness. When we say people live in the darkness, they live in a space of the devil, or Satan. It's Satan's sphere. We talk about it as a metaphor for misery, for ignorance, they're in the darkness, for, of course, death, for chaos, for the absence of God. And if you look at this, I can look at Bruegel for a long time. This is a Bruegel Last Judgment. Have any of you seen this Last Judgment? Here is the maw of death. Can you tell me what else you see here? I know it's a little bit hard to tell, but what's happening to these people? This is the Last Judgment. And the Last Judgment, of course, has been a theme of art production, and a lot of artists took it on, especially in the medieval period and the early modern period. And this is who is this again? Bosch. Okay, did I say Bosch, or did I say Bruegel? Yeah, shoot myself. It starts with B. Yes, Hieronymus Bosch. I think this one's at the Prado in Spain, but I'm not sure about that. Is that right? Yeah. Because I remember standing in front of this. But you can see how the imagination of artists turned on to this. Much more interesting to paint the Last Judgment and what happens to those who have sinned and are evil than it is to paint a happier ending to the story. And he just let his imagination go. So there's all these bizarre things in here. Bodies that are half there, people gnawing on other people, sin and fornication. So it's I love this as an occasion to just think about, if your thoughts about darkness tend to associate a darkness with evil, then this is probably attractive to you as an imaginary landscape of judgment about the darkness and those who live in the dark. Okay. But I want to also talk about this, which is a very important aspect of the way we metaphorize darkness. And so if you think about it, I couldn't take the time to do a kind of cross-faith survey of how other faith traditions or other faith practices, how they metaphorize darkness. But certainly through the Christian lens, this notion of the biblical interpretation of darkness as certain kinds of interpretations of the Bible and misinterpretations of the Bible associate this cluster of things with the darkness, that it had a profound effect on 400 years of conquest and colonialism, and it persists in our imaginary. There's still this imaginary available to us that many people today draw on, an imaginary about who is it that's associated with this darkness. So from the misinterpretation of the Bible about the curse of Ham, the one who is sent out who was expelled from the tribes, and Ham was, in some Christian interpretations early on, associated with Africa, and was understood to have been a dark person. Dark in terms of skin color. Now, mind you, that's in part because, except for people like Rembrandt, who when he painted Christ, painted him as a Semitic person, as somebody from the Middle East. We've had, not so much now, but even when I was growing up, we know what the figure of Christ that we saw in paintings that people hung in their houses. Christ as Tab Hunter, right? Looked kind of like Tab Hunter. So there's a sense in which the figure of Christ for a long time was deracinated. It was, it was re-racinated as white. Anyway, so there's biblical misinterpretations of people who looked dark. And then in the processes of colonial expansion, as the Western powers, as Spain, Portugal, Germany, England, the Netherlands, Belgium, as first the conquerors went out, the explorers, then the conquistadors, the ones who were going to tame the land so that wealth could be extracted from it. What happened is they confronted peoples of difference in the lands that they appropriated and then governed and claimed. And what did they do with those people after they exterminated many of them?
Slavery, reservations.
Some were enslaved. The ones who were exported elsewhere were forced into labor, forced labor, extermination, enslavement, forced labor, and then the church came in as a part of this process, the Christian church, and provided, through its interpretation of the difference of other people, provided a justification because the people that were either brought to the various colonies from Africa or that were colonized in various parts of the world were seen as not as advanced as the Europeans. And so they were less than fully human. And the obligation of the church was to make them human, to educate them, to convert them, to make them like us. But of course, they're always like us with a difference because they're of different ethnic origins, different racial formations. Now, talking about the issue of race becomes complicated because it's a discourse that arose in the 19th century to justify the differences among categories of people and to think about them on, instead of the old great chain of being from the early modern period, which was God created the world and created a chain of beings in it, and humans are up at the highest point below God in that chain. And people of difference could be below the human, and that gets translated or shifted after Darwin and the survival of the fittest, evolutionary processes. Then it became white, Western civilized people were at the top of the the human, and people who were less civilized, that's less like us, produce less knowledge than we produce, know less than we know, they are seen as inferior in that evolutionary process. They were before. They are, for some people it would be they're caught in evolution not going all the way. So you get that the church, the economic extraction of wealth from all of these places, the church providing a kind of justification for whites to take over these lands and bring enlightenment to the people in those lands while they're extracting all this wealth and labor from them. So that whole historical process survives or lives on, has long tails. And the long tails are all the cultural stereotypes that float around today about, think about the descriptions that in the 19th century in the U.S. after the end of slavery, think about the discourse that arose about freed slaves cannot be full citizens, even though there are the amendments, constitutional amendments, saying they are equal. They can't be because they're associated with immorality, sinfulness, with inferiority, and as threats, predators. So Jim Crow kept the metaphors in place and the identifications of certain people of color, with the powers of darkness, or with these ideas of what happens, what the darkness means. And those, we heard those play out all during. We hear those all the time in the political season and in the political realm. Remnants of this. Not bold, often not bold, but remnants. Lazy. Uneducable. So for us, as citizens of this country and as Christians, we are inheritors of this history. And for me, that makes it interesting to figure out how you can escape this circuit of imagining darkness as tied to the inferiority of large populations around the world. So this is a piece that I came upon while I was thinking about this and what I wanted to say about it. And this captures someone today, an African-American woman of faith, trying to figure out how to think about this residue, this inheritance. Good guys wear white, bad guys wear black. That was enacted all the time on television. It's in the, with the rise of television and westerns and things like that. We feel that cats and the dark continent. It's interesting to think about. Africa was early on labeled the dark continent. So it's a reference perhaps to the blackness of the people, but it's unknowable, it's threatening, it's inscrutable, it's uncivilized. Okay. Anyway, but it's okay to tell a white lie Lily white hands are coveted. It's great to be pure as the driven snow. Angels of brides wear white. Devil's food cake is chocolate. Angel's food cake is white. We shape language, and we are shaped by it. It is our culture. White is esteemed. It is heavenly, sunlight, clear, pure, immaculate, innocent, and beautiful. At the same time, black is evil, wicked, gloomy, depressing, angry, sullen. Ascribing negative and positive values to black and white enhances the institutionalization of the culture's racism. The words black and dark, now this is where it becomes interesting. The words black and dark don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. The words white and light don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. Imagine a world that had only light or dark. We need both, dark and light and dark. So this is somebody who's thinking about the everyday language that we use, about which we are totally unconscious as we are using it. But the depths of its participation in a long history of colonialism, exploration, colonialism, imperialism. Okay, so let's come at this then talk about darkness in some different ways. So this is an African-American pastor in a church in New Jersey. Again, I was out looking for interesting things people had been saying about darkness and the imagery of darkness, but also reclaiming how do you reclaim darkness? And this is a way of thinking about reframing from the biological point of view. In one sense, the body needs darkness. The body must have darkness. And that's a part of our system of being healthy and recovering. So there's the biological need for that. There's the sense that thinking differently about light isn't the escape from or the way out of evil, sin, and all those things associated with darkness. Darkness is the generator of life. If you think about the womb as the generator of life, but also in terms of, if you're into biblical interpretation, I say that because, I'm sorry, that's a weird thing to say in the church. If you're into biblical association, I have a complicated response to always going to the Bible for some kind of meaning. I can't go there. That's not what we're talking about now. That's my own issue. But anyway, so a way of thinking about what God had first was the darkness. It is the primal condition. And how do we think about that? So let's think about some associations with darkness that are really important, that are positive. We need it. The darkness can be a consoling kind of enfolding. Almost, now see, I'm doing some language work here. I'm going to anthropomorphize darkness, making it into a human being, because I was just about ready to say, it holds us, it hugs us. But that's my sleight of hand to do that anthropomorphizing. But we can think of it as an active site of consolation, we think of it as germination. It's under the ground is where things germinate. That's the darkness under the surface. We think about it as rejuvenation and a need for recovery. We can think about it as a conservation of energy. If you think about hibernation among animals, they go into the darkness to survive and then come out of it. It's a site of mystery, wonder, and awe. It's some spiritual practices, some indigenous spiritual practices see the darkness as a place where spirit ancestors can return, through which they can return to you. The darkness is active. It can be seen as a space of creation and introspection. And we say an incubation of ideas. It can be a place of protection and safety. And I was thinking last night about the Underground Railroad and how that organized the possibility of freedom for African Americans, and it required night for it to be successful. And then it can provide us a perspective on our place in the universe. And there's a couple other this is a reference to the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address. How many people know about this? I've been doing this at Thanksgiving with friends that we eat with, where we go around the table and give a part of this address. It's a long address, but it's addressed to all. It's an expressing thanks for all of the aspects of the universe, including the moon, and which is identified as an object, obviously, that we can only see in the darkness, although we sometimes see it in light, but mostly in the darkness. So we put our minds together to give thanks to our oldest grandmother, the moon, who lights the nighttime sky. Now, nothing can light the sky unless there's darkness, right? They're inseparable. They constitute one another. And we're perverted if one part of the thing that constitutes the other is attached to all these negative connotations. Anyway, and this is, I'm going to go to this one. This is my favorite one. This is the Earth and the Moon from space. Now, that image speaks to, at least it speaks to me, how many are moved by this image? You don't have to be, hallelujah, there is an image, but just find it wondrous, awe-inspiring about our tininess. I don't know about you, I find it very consoling to be just spot, not even a spot. It can't be. We are just this spot in this huge, huge expanse.
This huge darkness.
In the huge darkness. Yeah. Okay, I just want to check. I'll and before I ask if people have questions or comments or other ways in which they like to see or like to think about darkness, with an Emily Dickinson poem. How many of you love Emily Dickinson? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. We have Dickensians in the audience. Okay, it says, I have to get when you read Emily Dickinson, you have to do it right. And it's sometimes hard, so I hope I get this right. We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment, we uncertain step for newness of the night. Then fit our vision to the dark and meet the road erect. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain, when not a moon disclose a sign or star come out within. The bravest grope a little and sometimes hit a tree directly in the forehead, that as we learn to see, either the darkness alters or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight, and life steps almost straight. Isn't that just brilliant? Oops, sorry. That was my heart pumping. So the way that my part of the conversation was going to fit with the chains is that what I've been trying to talk about, and what you also may be thinking about, is how do you tell a different story about the light and the dark? And then Jane was going to talk about, in your personal storytelling, how do you tell stories about yourself, and how do you use the narrative of lightness and darkness? So, but I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to, because I could have done a longer thing, but we're almost at 11:30, and I can't do it off the cuff really well without thinking about how to ask the right questions about restoring darkness and light in your lives. But maybe some of you are thinking about aspects of restoring darkness. Anybody have some comments? What do you think? Oh, okay. Yes, so if people have questions or comments.
Speaking stick.
Yep.
This was really a wonderful, wonderful thing, Sid, because you open all sorts of references about darkness and literary works and popular works. I won't ask I'm also a retired English professor. I won't ask an English professor question, but a couple of these things are quite interesting. For example, you were talking about darkness as comfort. Well, let's just go to those of us in my generation, to Simon and Garfunkel. Hello,
darkness, your old friend. Right.
And so every time you look at any of these images that Sid has shared with us, you really come up with associations. And I think the wonderful thing for me, the helpful thing for me, was that a lot of these associations really point you back to positive aspects rather than negative. Even looking at, for example, the image of the moon in the Haugonense, I've never been able to pronounce it, Haugonense prayer, if you think about the moon, it is light, but it's reflected light. It's reflected light from the sun. And if you spent too many years teaching early modern English literature, the sun, S-U-N, becomes the S-O-N of God, and so on. But this is so rich, and thank you. That's all.
Oh, thank you. I mean, yeah, go ahead. I don't want to hear myself talk more.
I was going to say, what I think about is that in the beginning, there was only darkness. So it's a matter of how you compare. You have people that want to say that the darkness takes away the light, but they have it backwards, because in the beginning there was only darkness. It's the light that modifies the darkness. So darkness in itself cannot be evil. Darkness is the beginning, and darkness is, so darkness is always there, modified by the light. So we can't, and darkness in and of itself is not evil. So that to me it's just putting the baseline is speaking from darkness. The moon lightens the darkness. The darkness doesn't lighten the moon, right? So think of it as in the beginning there was only darkness. That's where the Bible begins, I believe. So,
yeah.
Hello, I'm Beth Gerwig, member here. I think of darkness defined as a hurt, personal hurt, and it has led me to making a choice, to choose to remain in a negative space or to grow out of that. So darkness has been a point of recovery many, many times.
Generative.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. There's a Theodore Repke poem. I have that. I'm not gonna. It's a longish one, but I just want to show you the first lines of it. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. Now he was, that it's a complicated thing when you get, because there is the metaphoric salience of darkness for mental breakdown, mental depression, and so you could say that the darkness, in that sense, brings with it a sense of gloom and inescapability. So, so it's interesting to try and think through how the language we use, what other kinds of metaphors might come to bear on how you talk about where you find yourself in when you are in great grief or great trauma. But the question is it the darkness that is that, or is it the darkness felt emotionally? Is it the metaphor of darkness that becomes helpful for people to think through the situation we're in? Okay. The absence of light. Yes, it is the absence of light, but I'm trying to get away from the notion that light is... We want to live in light all the time. If we only had light, think about that. The northern countries and the way southern countries, there is light 24 hours a day. You have to simulate darkness in those situations because so it's how do you light is associated, at least in a lot of cultures, or certainly the Western culture, with enlightenment. You want to have light. You want have knowledge or truth or whatever.
Isn't darkness in perfect state?
Right, philosophical. Yep. Okay.
I was just going to say, one of my favorite memories of dark revealing light was going to the Death Valley Desert at night, and no pollution of light from other sources, and in the planetarium of light with the stars. It's just it just is so moving and godlike,
Uh-huh. But it only can be there because it's got,
Right.
it can only be seen in darkness. Other.
Sid, little quick one.
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, you can talk.
Okay, yes. Just really, really down to earth. With my association with darkness was as a child growing up. Come home when it gets dark and the street lights come on, and now you're back in the warmth and the intimacy of your family.
I don't need the microphone. I'll just be all sass. Humans, and I guess animals, need the darkness so badly we get it every few milliseconds when we blink. Well, fairly artificial, actually. Or we get a 24-hour daylight. We go to sleep still. We close our eye.
You close your eyes to pray. You go into you go inside. I guess you go, yeah.
Even plants wouldn't grow. Plants wouldn't grow if they didn't go into the soil, the darkness, in order to come out into the light and grow, which relates to the psychologically oriented stuff that Beth Gerwig was suggesting about how we only grow through experiences of darkness. It may be the original state. I don't know.
There's also tells a plant when to blossom and when to house.
That's all I know what to blossom.
This group has been holding its own over here, but you're kind of stingy. Somebody has to say something from this side.
Do you like talk? I love the idea of the interaction, that you must have both the wholeness and the point of interaction where transformation has the possibility of gathering energy from both. And so the wholeness comes to mind in your references. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the point of transformation. So
It's like remind to change the way.
It's 11:30. People who want to leave, thank you for coming. And those who want to stay and chat, we can chat for a little bit longer, but I send you home with a thought puzzle, but now I can't remember what this thought puzzle is. Oh. On the issue about how we attach darkness to certain peoples and attach all this set of qualities to them as well. Just think about, as you are reading or out and about and hearing comments, just keep your ears open for those persistent stereotypes to come in and out of conversations. And think about how does this conversation in Darkness and Light give us some way of rethinking that history, or of breaking the bonds of that history, the binds of that history? Right. because we need that more than anything right now. Thank you, everybody.